Anyways, still farm with my family. I have been working with BW for BW since June of 21. Started out doing a lot of our research. A lot of research that you'll see today is research that I conducted when I first started working here. On my farm, though, I actually have been using Biodyne technology since 2016. Pretty young, ripe age, I started marketing my family's grain. I just kind of had an eye for it, but then you can't really market grain without understanding, your break-even bottom dollar, right? And so that kind of led me on input path, right? How do I cut costs? And then that led to how do I make my agronomy more efficient? So I've been making a lot of the agronomy decisions on my farm since I was about 16. I've been marketing grain since I was 14. And so what it actually led to is how do I make money at $2.73, which is the lowest I've ever sold corn for. Hopefully it doesn't go any lower than that. I know some of you might be smirking. Anyway, how do I make money in that kind of environment? How do I make money in a $7 bushel, $7 bushel corn environment just like this year too? And that ultimately led to BW and Biodyne talking about nutrient solubility and nutrient efficiency. Like Jason said, 30 cents of that phosphorus dollar is actually used. Well, if I can at least get 60 or 70. So a little bit of the agronomy behind a lot of our new innovations is all about structure. And I firmly believe this quote is structure trumps nutrition. So actually I worked with a hog producer very locally since I was 17. He has the highest part per million PK, very high nitrate tests all the dang time. According to ISU, is picture perfect farm, but yet the guy yields below county average almost every year. And you go and check out his farm, and the problem is he's got horribly compacted, crappy soil structure, just absolute junk soil structure. So that's point number one. Who gives a rip about the fertility in your soil if you can't access it? Number two, his roots always sucked. He always had goosenecking, always had a lot of issues because of that compaction. Root structure was horrible. And so that to me is kind of an aha moment as far as understanding fertility is great. You need to have fertility, you need to have fertilizer, but how do you turn fertilizer into fertility and how do you access that fertility? And so I'm going to try to breeze through this for the sake of time, but what drives yield in corn? In essence, I could read all that crap off, but I'm not going to. At the end of the day, the big bold letters at the bottom is structure. Again, structure, structure, structure. What's going on below ground, what's going on above ground. Like what Bob was mentioning, that root to shoot ratio, below ground biomass should be a 1-to-1 relationship of what's above ground. And so what drives yield in both corn and soybeans is structure, tight internode length, more of that stout round stalk diameter, giving you that more vigor and healthier crop. A couple pictures of my own farm is, you can't see that with a darn, but that far left-hand picture, I was out subsoiling this fall with a Blue Jet, if anybody's ever done one of them at 1.7 miles an hour. That was what my topsoil looked like. I started out in a flood, almost, I was delayed planted, finished planting June 27th. And so I started out wet, ended dry. We all know that's a recipe for success, right? And that's what my soil looked like when I was breaking it apart. Again, soil structure mattering a heck of a lot more than even anything that came after that, right? How can I manipulate root structure if my soil structure looks like that? Later, what that attributed to, in that middle picture, you kind of see a gooseneck right down there at the bottom of that corn plant. And what that was from was actually a very, very high windstorm in June. So corn was only this tall, it was bent over, 40-mile-an-hour winds for a sustained amount of time, and prop right back up. You think you're out of the woods, but really it was goosenecked all season long just underneath of the soil, making that plant's root structure compromised. Okay, I got to bust move. So BW Prime, one thing that Nate was really heavy on making sure I talk about, so soil structure. What manipulates soil structure as a whole is soluble calcium and soluble carbon. So we keep hearing WEOC, you're going to keep hearing WEOC. If you're bored of hearing about WEOC, sorry about it, get over it. But WEOC is the glue that holds together your soil aggregates, right? So you've got sand, silt, clay, and the glue that holds all three of those particles together is soluble carbon. So as you increase soluble carbon in that soil, you will see higher levels of soil flocculation, i.e. more gas exchange porosity for better water permeability and infiltration, as well as more area for those roots to explore. The other thing that's in BW Prime is Well, so I say soluble calcium in humic and fulvic form, but the other piece is the 501 biological team that we have. So these are all really big words, and I'm not even going to pronounce half of them, but 28 out of those 30 microbes in that jug degrade cellulose, lignin, and chitin, which are the complex carbons that make up your organic material in your soil. So if we can degrade those complex carbons into simple carbon, now, we finally have some WEOC, right? So with BW prime, you're getting soluble calcium and you're getting soluble carbon. This spring, let's just get to some data. What we saw out of the application of soluble calcium, so of prime, is that we saw a 16% increase in soluble calcium. So again, on a part per million ammonium acetate test, you might see a 3,000 part per million. According to University of Minnesota or Iowa State, like where I went, you're good on calcium, don't ever think about calcium. But typically in 365, you'll rarely ever see soluble calcium above even a 500 sometimes. And so influencing it that much, that quickly, that was only about 2 weeks post-application. And it's a pretty remarkable change. Another test in Iowa, this one was pretty interesting on how that calcium was able to rebound late season. Does everybody kind of see that? Where ended up with a high level of soluble calcium compared to the untreated check. It kind of tapered off almost, kind of leveled out, and then at the end of the season it came back. Why is that? Is because soluble calcium can be held in the soluble form in the presence of soluble carbon. So that is why we pair 501 as well as humic fulvics with that soluble calcium, so that way you can get that through the entire season and as a soil mediation property. So at the end of the day, what prime is doing for you is increasing soil porosity, gas exchange, all those things. So you're mediating your soil structure. You're also feeding that plant with available calcium to manipulate its above ground structure, right? The more calcium, if you grow with calcium, typically you'll see tighter internodes and better circular stalk diameter. So nutritionally, you're gonna be manipulating the vascular system of that plant, increasing the uptake of other nutrients beyond just calcium. Anybody in here use urea, AMS, anhydrous, any sort of positive forms of, I said anhydrous and boom, my hands go up. So those positive forms of nitrogen is ammonia. One really neat thing to pay attention with soluble calcium is that the uptake of ammonia is reliant on there being high levels of soluble calcium in your soil. And so we know that ammonia is a more efficient form of nitrogen once it's in the plant. It's closer to a protein form. However, though, you need to have soluble calcium in that soil solution for that plant to efficiently uptake that ammonia. Otherwise, it gets denitrified back to nitrate. Anybody use gypsum in here? Yes, no? No? We won't talk about it. But no, so how does prime kind of compare to gypsum, right? Gypsum's usually what we talk about when it comes to calcium needs. Gypsum is calcium sulfate. The chemical reaction that's happening there is your calcium sulfate breaks apart, you get soluble calcium that displaces or knocks magnesium off of your exchange site, putting it in this soluble state. Then that magnesium is hooked together with a sulfate, making it very, very leachable and essentially leaching it to a deeper soil profile, and that's where you get that flocculation effect. Magnesium is what makes that soil really, really tight. So what the interesting, really cool thing, you can't even see it, about BW prime is that the calcium that's in BW prime is 370 times more soluble than gypsum. That's a study actually done up here in Minnesota. So 370 times more soluble than gypsum, meaning that the 2 gallon an acre rate of prime, in order to get the equivalent, so in order to get the same amount of soluble calcium that you get out of 2 gallons of prime, you would need to apply 789 pounds of gypsum to an acre. The other thing, this is actually that AMS 300 times more soluble than the sulfur in gypsum. That's actually data from calcium products in Fort Dodge, Iowa, where I'm really close to, and they're willing to actually admit that their sulfur is not very available. And so when you're using gypsum to mediate that soil and create that flocculation attempt, really a lot of times you're going to manipulate it year 5, 10, 7, whatever. I'm young enough to be ornery enough where I don't give a crap about my one-day imaginary grandkids to invest money into gypsum right now on my farm, not knowing if I'm going to run it the next year. And so this is a way I can get plant available calcium that's going to drive crop nutrition, right, plant health, but then also mediate my soil today and long term compared to what gypsum would typically do. So after all those efficiencies built in, what you actually end up with, what your needs of AMS to compare to that 784 pounds of gypsum would all equate to be about $23 an acre to get the same amount of soluble sulfate and soluble calcium as 790 pounds of gypsum in year one. Anybody have in-furrow? Show of hands. Look. Gosh, there's so many of you. You got to be kidding me. Just going to talk about Works just in general. So Works utilizes calcium. Works is, there's Soy Works, then there's Corn Works. So Soy Works does have calcium included. Corn Works we pair with Synergy, which is our calcium, magnesium, nitrogen source. What we're ending up accomplishing with Works in furrow is, compared to a traditional row starter, you usually overstimulate your primary root system. So you go in the first year using starter, I was guilty of it. I had this really long, sexy, amazing radical, right? And I felt like the best farmer in the world. Come to harvest, there's no yield difference. I actually did a trial 3 years ago and I had a yield decrease. And so why in the heck is that? Is that the more energy you're putting into that primary root system that's not really active and working for you beyond V8-ish time frame, the less energy you have to initiate nodal roots in order to drive your vertical root system. So if you ever do a root dig at about VT, and you shake off the dirt and there's this hole in the middle, everybody know what I'm talking about? No? Nobody does root digs. All right, that's a bummer. But anyway, sometimes there's a hole right here, right in the middle, and it kind of goes like this. The root structure looks like that, which is crap, right? That's a lot of brace roots typically half the time that's giving you that structure. Why in the hell is there a hole in the middle? It's stupid. Why would the plant ever want to have a hole in the middle of its rhizosphere, right? Seems like lost opportunity. What that actually is your primary root system was probably very, very overstimulated early season. And so what you did is occupied space. And then once that plant started to go dormant, you actually started, or once that root system, that primary root system started to go into that dormant phase, you ended up pushing a lot more nodal root systems after that. So a good healthy plant that has got very good nodal root structure, if you squint your eyes, should almost look kind of like a taproot structure, right? Upside down triangle. And so that's what we're accomplishing with Works, is that on the corn side, we're driving nodal root initiation as well as that long-term deep vertical rooting when that's paired with calcium, magnesium, nitrogen. So on the soybean side, what we're doing is we're increasing nodes per acre. So bean yield is more directly correlated to nodes per acre rather than just beans per acre. Therefore, with the application of SoyWorks, what we're doing is stacking really, really tight internodes on top of each other, making that thing a lot more agronomically stout. And nobody likes to combine large beans, at least I don't. Biocast Max, and I'm probably going to wrap it up actually. So Biocast Max is our kind of full biological offering. So Biocast Max uses 401 and 501 biological teams from Biodyne. So why is it important that we apply actual teams of microbes? So these microbes have been studied in the lab, in the field, and proven through 365 over multiple years. So 401 is your heavy nutrient solubilizer. A lot of available phosphorus created through that. Sulfur, let's list them through. All right, we got N2 fixers, we've got ammonifiers, we've got phosphorus solubilizers, sulfur, iron, zinc, potassium. And at a 501, we've got some overlapping capabilities, but the biggest thing again is that we're going to always increase soluble carbon with the application of 501. It produces more soluble carbon than it consumes. That being said, so why are the two paired together is that 401 does consume a metric crop load of soluble carbon. 401 kind of huddles around the rhizosphere of that plant, getting root exudates in order to perform its function. The reason why we apply 501 with 401 is, if you can see this graph, and if you can't, sorry, but this first bar right here is 401, second is meltdown, the third one is both 401 and 501. The last bar is the untreated check. What we actually ended up seeing out of 401 is a decrease of soluble carbon long term. Meltdown saw an increase, and the two together we still saw an increase in soluble carbon and a higher yield potential. So on that 4-year study in Southwest Iowa, it actually brought, look at that, I got it right there. It actually brought an average of about 13 bushel higher when both microbial teams were used on the same acre. The last, I don't know, I've got maybe 30 seconds. Let's talk about Full Sun real quick. So Full Sun is a foliar product. Again, focus on crop manipulation. So it's not necessarily foliar nutrition. It is a physiological change in that crop. I have a hard time claiming it's a foliar. That's how it's applied, but that's not how it's used by the plant. Full Sun is a unique formulation as far as proportions of secondary macro and micronutrients, all balanced within the plant. And so what we get out of Full Sun, because those nutrients are balanced, is a longer leaf, wider leaf, and deeper leaf. So we're doing nothing but increasing making a larger solar panel, and also making it more efficient at creating sugar by manipulating chlorophyll depth. In those pictures, you really can't see that far left one, but in the second round where there's 2 leaves right next to each other, yes, it's a larger leaf. The coolest thing that I saw out of Full Sun is a healthier midrib. The midrib is the vein that gets the sugar that your leaf produces to your phloem in your plant and actually drives a systemic change. If you spray a foliar nutritional product and you see a wider leaf and a darker leaf, congratulations, you built more sugar. But did you move the sugar? Did you use the sugar? It doesn't matter if you make more sugar. What matters is if you use it. And so what we see is not just an accumulation of sugar, but we also see the mobility of sugar by manipulating the phloem through the use of those nutritionally. So we manipulate that stalk diameter, which is going to drive more sugar mobility through the phloem. And we also have got some bioactive compounds in there that trigger sugar movement through the plant. Last little piece here is this indicates a nutrient balance index. So if any of you do a agronomy 365 tissue sample report, you're going to see percentages and part per millions of nutrients in the tissue. Even after working here at BW, I get horribly frustrated when I get a tissue sample back from my own farm and I just see high, medium, low, right? Anybody start that way with tissue sampling, right? You see high, medium, low. Your nitrogen says medium, and you go, son of a bitch, I want to put on more yield, and I know nitrogen gives me yield, so I'm going to apply nitrogen, right? And I'm going to ignore my potassium. I'm going to ignore my boron. I'm going to ignore all that. What's really neat is that 365 has got this nutrient balance index that indicates the proportion of nutrients within that plant based off of its antagonistic and protagonistic relationships within the plant. Meaning, as one increases, so does the other. As one decreases, so does the other, that sort of thing. So what I saw after a tassel application of Full Sun was a decrease in nutrient balance index, which is a good thing. The closer to 0 that baby is, the more in balance my plant is. So nutritionally, I made it more balanced through the plant, not through some wide drop or anything like that, but just this simple foliar. What that attributed to on my farm across 4 replications in the same field was a 15 bushel yield advantage. This was not paired with a fungicide either, just for your information. So again, what we're doing with Full Sun is essentially increasing leaf biomass, which is going to drive more sugar production. We're manipulating midrib health, making a more erect leaf, increasing sunlight capture and therefore more photosynthetic activity. We're also delivering those sugars to that plant's sinks by manipulating the midrib, by manipulating the vascular system within that stalk. So that way we can increase photosynthates, but we can also deliver photosynthates to the rest of the plant as well as the root system that continues to feed the biology. So overall, that's kind of the big premise of our system is that the ultimate biostimulant is a healthy root system. And we know that Full Sun delivers fresh root exudates. There's data behind that, but we do know that it delivers fresh root exudates as well as brand new rooting. So overall, the biology increases crop health drives more soil health, and as we drive more crop health again, we can drive more soil health again through the season. So last little piece of data is proof behind that. We ended up seeing biological respirations, that CO2 burst Jason and Christina were talking about. The untreated check was declining, which was just the trend line of the season. And after applying Full Sun, not only did it maintain biological respiration, but it increased biological respiration simply from spraying Full Sun. No biology was really added. So that's it for me. I hope I got it all through. But I'll be around for any questions.